morning. Welcome to the CIDCI Online Salon Series. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the CIDCI Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you here today. CIDCI's mission is to accelerate innovation, disruption, and change to improve the built environment. We create networks that share knowledge, experience, and ideas through productive dialogue. CIDCI is a not-for-profit organization that relies on your financial support to provide for these programs. Thank you so much to our sponsors who make all of this possible. CIDCI is proud to announce the start of our Innovation Lab earlier this month. Led by UC Berkeley's Sarah Beckman and Rachel Zombach, this online program uses a self-paced format to create a community of practice within the AEC community. A 6-module program will teach participants the mindsets and skill sets associated with the innovation process. The content for the modules will be delivered asynchronously via Google Classroom and will include videos, readings, and discussion questions. Participants can access the material at any time during the 2021 session. Details are available at the CIDCI website. CIDCI is also starting to plan our fall forum, which we've entitled Inspiring Innovation in a Re-Emerging World. That will take place October 4 to 8. Over 5 days, we'll spend our mornings or evenings, depending upon your time zone, exploring a wide range of issues, including how building owners view our return to work after the pandemic, what failure can teach us about resiliency, and examine some of the startups changing the world. All events will be online. If you see something you want to share with a client or friend, feel free to direct them to the CIDCI website to hear recordings of this event and all of our events. Okay, here's a bit of information about how today's session is going to work. We're recording this presentation and we'll place it on the CIDCI website as soon as possible. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat box. Today's session will run for 60 minutes. CIDCI is so delighted to be talking about a topic which many of us have been wondering about as we've watched billionaires hurl themselves into space over the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk about how can we begin to prepare for extraterrestrial construction. Today, we'll explore what does it take to build on another planetary body? Does answering this question translate to benefits for us here on Earth? We will examine some of the theory and what is happening today for creating a future in space. We've invited several of those people who hurled themselves through space, so they may be joining us. Look for them in the chat box. Our speaker today is Henning Roedel, a member of DPR's construction innovation team, supporting the company's West Coast business units and leading its robotic efforts. He received his PhD from Stanford University in civil engineering, where he helped develop a novel bio-based concrete for lunar and Martian construction. Henning, we're so delighted to have you with us. Take it away.
Thank you, Margie. I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I hope everyone else is as well. I'm going to start my screen share, and we'll dive into the presentation. So welcome, everyone. Good day to you all. To help kind of get you into the right mindset, I'd like for a moment everyone to close their eyes. So go ahead, close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that you are part of the very first crew to construct a permanent outpost on an extraterrestrial body. Let that sink in. Look around. Now, my first question for you is, where are you landing? And feel free to use the chat box to enter in your responses or keep them to yourself. That's fine. But imagine you're doing a soft landing and you're landing on some body. My next question to you is, what are you going to build first? Is it going to be a road? Is it going to be a habitat? Is it going to be a factory? Excellent, excellent. Next question, what did you bring with you? Did you bring equipment tools, food, air, water? I guess that begs the question, how are you going to build what you're planning to build? Okay, so you've stepped onto the surface. Congratulations. It's been one small step, but a very long journey. And let's say you look up from the ground and you see this. Oops. Did your plan just change? Maybe. Maybe. I hope you brought a really big excavator or something to drive around this really big rock and crater. So let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Henning, and I think about this stuff all the time. I love that exercise. I love getting my mind into that headspace. I've been working on this for just over a decade now. During my 20s, I was at Stanford University, and while many of my peers were making their way in industry, I went ahead and invented an extraterrestrial construction material. I proposed and studied a method of construction on the moon. I simulated micrometeorite impacts on that material. And I also proposed a novel form of banking with others to help finance infrastructure in space. And that was all sort of for my PhD. Since then, I've been sort of waiting for the billionaires to kind of get their act together so that we can have regular trips to the moon and or Mars. And so meanwhile, I'm at DPR Construction. I'm very fortunate to be the Western Region Innovation Leader. And I've worked in the space and construction industries for my entire career. And I do consider myself to be very lucky to be at the forefront of technology for our industry. And so let's get into the talk now properly. Preparing for extraterrestrial construction. I've sort of broken it up into three phases. A planning phase, which has two parts to it. Really want to know where you're going, where you're heading, so that you don't run into issues like landing on a big boulder. So we'll talk a little bit about the environments on Mars and on the moon. And then we'll talk about concept of operations, right? And it'll be sort of kind of like a lecture, but I'll share some of the insights that I learned over the last 10 years, because I certainly did not set out at the beginning of my life to be part of this journey. The opportunities were there, so I took them. So we'll talk about concept of operations. Then we'll start to talk about how we pick apart pieces of that concept of operations to really test and develop it. And so I'll share some of the things that have been done in the last decade. And then finally, some lessons learned and some conclusions. So, and ideally, those lessons learned also translate to improvements on Earth. We'll see. So let's talk about Mars. Mars is the red planet. It's the furthest of the rocky planets from the sun. And that means it receives quite a bit less sunlight energy than we find here at Earth. So your solar panels aren't as effective on the surface. In terms of day and night, however, you have roughly 24 hours and 40 minutes of rotation per, they call it a sol. So not necessarily an Earth day. And then in terms of size, Mars is quite a bit smaller than Earth. And so its surface is about 38%. The gravity field at the surface is about 3/8 that of Earth. So your jump is a little bit better, and your golf game is probably a lot better. But comparing that to the moon, the moon is about 16% or 1/6 of Earth's gravity. So, and then finally, Mars has 4 seasons, just like we have here on Earth. It has a 25-degree tilt. And so you can have temperature fluctuations between a very brisk minus 133 degrees Celsius near the poles in the winter to up to a very pleasant 27 degrees Celsius near the equator in the summertime. Mars also, as many of you may know, has a thin carbon dioxide atmosphere. And that's really important because that's something maybe we can use to our advantage. It's not great for breathing, but it's great for having carbon and oxygen readily available pretty much anywhere on the surface. There is access to water. We know that water runs and flows on the surface of Mars. And we've also actually discovered quite a bit of water on the surface of the moon in the last decade or so. So that's really opened up the possibilities of to what we can achieve. You are subject to meteorite impacts, and you are subject to radiation. So let's talk a little bit more about radiation. So there are multiple types of radiation, but we're going to focus on particle radiation. And when the Curiosity rover was in transit from Earth to Mars back in the 2012 timeframe, it was measuring a daily dose of 1.8 millisieverts. And you might be thinking to yourself, I know exactly what a millisievert is, and you don't need to go any further, Henning. But for the rest of you, that's equivalent to about 18 chest x-rays, right? So think about that. Every single day, you're receiving 18 chest x-rays throughout your travel. In addition to that, once you're on the surface of Mars, you are being subjected to a daily dose of 0.7 millisieverts, or about 7 chest x-rays. So, okay, that's per day, how much you're getting, but let's talk about like an entire trip to Mars. Well, a fast trip to Mars is about 180 days, and that's very fast. So on the low end, you're probably going to receive about 650 millisieverts. And okay, so what does that mean in terms of your exposure limit? Well, NASA sets a career limit of between 600 and 1200 millisieverts, depending on your age and whether if you are a man or a woman. And so, all in all, a Mars trip is about 650 millisieverts, and that's a lot. That's kind of scary. So maybe Mars isn't the best place to go first. Humble opinion, but this is my case. Okay, let's bring it a little bit closer back to Earth. Let's talk about the moon. Now, you're still going to be subjected to the radiation, but you're a lot closer, right? You're a few days away from Earth. You have multiple trip options, meaning you can launch pretty much any time of the year and get back to Earth in a few days if there is an emergency. But you have a different environment, right? The moon is tidally locked to Earth. That means it spins as fast as it orbits Earth. So we always see one side facing us. And because of that, the lunar day-night cycle is quite long. It's about 14 days of day and 14 days of night at the equator. Now, you can avoid that by going to the North and South poles, where in some areas you can get permanent day and permanent night. You have very little atmosphere, so you have almost no protection against meteorites. And so that becomes actually a much bigger issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so, yeah, you have to be ready for some really hot hots and some really cold colds at the moon. All right, speaking of meteorites, this is a model that just kind of shows what the flux of meteorites is across the surface of the moon. So it's not uniform, and some areas may be subject to more higher intensity events than others. So that's something to consider as well. Okay, a lot of information, but I think it's really important that everyone kind of understand if we're going to build somewhere, we need to understand its environment and what hazards are that we have to account for or deal with. But there are opportunities in that environment as well. For all the micrometeorites and meteorites that impact the moon's surface, they're depositing minerals that we could mine. They're creating permanently shadowed craters on the surface of the moon at the north and south poles, which is where we found most of the water that we didn't know existed before. And they're, trapped is in water ice. So now the big question is, how do we get access to that water? Because water can be used as rocket fuel. It can be used as fuel cell, right? Electrical generation, as well as just air for us to breathe and water for us to drink. So it's going to be an important basis of the sort of space economy. And, I think if we're going to be building something or doing something, we're going to have to get access to that water. And NASA agrees with that. So they are leading the way with a new challenge called the Break the Ice Challenge. And this is, I think, a good opportunity to dive into our next topic, which is a concept of operations. So a ConOps is basically what we do in the building industry on a regular basis, right? It's permitting, planning, designing, constructing, operating, maintaining, and then disposing of end of life, right? It's a systems-based view and analysis. Now, what differs between the building industry and, let's say, a space mission is that we're typically working with technologies that we know work, right? We're not developing too much new stuff and putting into the building. For the most part, steel is steel, concrete is concrete. We know it works. But in space, you're proposing all kinds of wacky ideas. So to kind of give you an example of a concept of operations, I pulled one of the team's videos that was just recently submitted, and you can find these on YouTube. This is a rocket-based mining technique. So let's spend a few moments watching it and seeing what they proposed.
NASA's Break the Ice Challenge is a scenario in the Aitken Basin near the South Pole. They have modeled an in-situ resource, 132,000 square meters of icy regolith, 0.2 to 3.5 meters deep, and grading 4% and 10% in two zones. The resource, nearly 70 million kilograms of water ice. NASA's challenge to our team, recover a minimum 10,000 kilograms of water. Let's go to the moon. Our team, Maston Space Systems, Lunar Outpost, and Honeybee Robotics have put together a complete package to accomplish NASA's mission and to address technology gaps. Here you see our lander touching down at the NASA delivery site. The rover, made by Lunar Outpost, is secured to the top and ready for deployment. This rover is the platform for transport and operations. It can negotiate the rugged terrain between delivery and excavation sites. It may charge its batteries at NASA's 10 kilowatt power plant at the delivery site and the power distribution point near the excavation site. The fully loaded rover, including 300 kilograms of ice, weighs 1,118 kilograms and can travel at 3.3 to 3.45 kilometers per hour. It can easily negotiate steep slopes, such as the 15 to 20% inclines as it makes its numerous 4-kilometer trips from the delivery site to the excavation site. The fuel system components and batteries for the equipment are aft on the rover. The Rocket M system is located mid-chassis, visible as a reinforced dome. The lower part of the dome is deployed during mining to secure a seal and capture icy regolith. Honeybee Robotics PlanetVac icy regolith handling system and the Aquafactorum ice beneficiation system are mounted forward. Containers below deck store ice for delivery. As the rover approaches the excavation site, it is guided to predetermined mining blocks selected by Maston's geologic team. Mining begins with parking the rover over the target area. The dome is deployed to create a seal between operations and the icy regolith. The Maston rocket fires a series of half-second pulses that fluidize the icy regolith, breaking it apart and releasing icy grains. The fluidized icy regolith fine fraction is conveyed into Honeybee Robotics' PlanetVac pneumatic system. This rapidly transports particles into the Aquafactorum beneficiation system. Particles pass over a magnetic separator, then into a pneumatic cyclone, and magnetic and more dense material is taken out. The remaining material passes over an electrostatic sorter to remove additional conductive grains, further concentrating ice particles. The remaining high-percentage ice separate is then sent through 2 additional pneumatic cyclones. The first, removing any additional dust, and the second, upgrading the ice and sending any gaseous components over cold plates to recapture rocket plume gases and any sublimated ice. The process is fast, being completed in 5 to 10 minutes. Non-ice fractions are exhausted via a tailings pipe to the lunar surface. Maston has conducted firing tests and crater generation in frozen regolith simulant to confirm the viability of the Rocket M system. The craters are rapidly excavated to 2 meters. Although the resource extends further, the Rocket M system will generate significant volumes of water ice product. For the long-term operations, Rocket M is projected to mine 3 craters per hour at 4 sites per day. That's 12 craters per day, allowing for the rover's round trip back to the delivery site and melting of ice into water. We anticipate an 85% recovery of ice, and that will give us 100 kilograms of ice per crater. Over our 355-day operating year, the program will recover 426,000 kilograms of ice annually. This is 43 times the NASA target of 10,000 kilograms. Here you see the rover utilizing the lander for ice concentrate and melting of ice to water storage, where it can be distributed to NASA and other companies. Rocket M is low maintenance, energy efficient, low payload weight, versatile and robust, and is projected to be profitable. Rocket M can be an asset for the cislunar economy.
All right. So, I mean, what a wild, crazy idea, right? A couple of points there. So one, hopefully you get a sense of what a concept of operations is all about, right? It's not just a facility being delivered. It's the soup to nuts operations of the facility and how you deliver it, how you get there. It's all kind of wrapped up in one. And you can see that, you know, the rocket system is the biggest unknown here, right? Have we ever mined with a rocket engine before? If you haven't, I recommend you try it out, but with a trained safety professional, of course. It sounds pretty amazing, and but they needed to test it, and so they showed some evidence for that. And so that's what I'm trying to get to here with this conversation. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is that they are a private group of private companies proposing this, and they're expecting to make a profit out of this. So all of a sudden now the space equation is no longer just a government funded by your taxpayers organization. This is funded by investors. They're expecting a return, and they're expecting, you know, a means of selling goods and services. So I think that is also a very key point, and it's a big change that's happened over the last 2 decades or so in space exploration. Okay, so moving on, let's talk a little bit about logistics, right? The first step of any plan is getting yourself and your equipment and your materials, everything you need there, because with space and extreme locations, you don't have infrastructure to rely on. There is no local Home Depot. And so with most space travel, there's a rocket that takes you off the surface of Earth. There is a module that helps guide you and orbits you, or brings you into an orbit around your target body, whether it's Mars or the Moon. And then there's a lander that brings you down to the surface. And then finally, there is a means of getting you off of the lander and onto the surface. And you can see some examples here. Common one for robots is this sort of ramp, but we're starting to see proposals. This is the Blue Moon lander on the on the right-hand side, and they're using a crane and gantry system. So all of this needs to be sort of considered and thought about and developed for your concept of operations. Once you're on the surface, now you can start thinking about construction, right? And that's really the topic here, is how are we going to build? And there's a lot of unknowns, but what we can do is look at Earth and see how we build, right? And I saw in some of the comments when you were thinking about your construction, some of you were thinking modular and pre-manufactured, right? Pre-manufactured, what you land is what you live in. Modular, you can combine and build into something bigger, But again, you're taking something that has been built on Earth over to the surface. And then finally, there's in situ construction, right? Where what we're used to here on Earth, the work is being done locally and by people who are trained to build. And so you're shipping mostly supplies at that point and constructing there. But as we all know, shipping in space is expensive. It's very expensive. And so a lot of folks in this area have been thinking about how do we utilize the resources that are up there, in situ resource utilization. And there's a couple of ideas that have been floated that I think are really gaining a lot of traction. So one, this is sort of your basic, bring it from Earth and bring a binder from Earth type of thing, mix it with an astronaut, and like you would any sort of bag of concrete. Not a great idea in some senses because you're putting humans in harm's way. You have to bring all of their supplies with you as well. So that means water, air, food, all that stuff. So a lot of folks have also been talking about robots, right? 3D printing. And that's gained a lot of traction, a lot of ideas. But 3D printing requires a pretty flat surface and nicely tuned environment. Similarly, people have been thinking about, well, could we just use the regolith to create molds for tools? Could we, and regolith, sorry for those unfamiliar, regolith is the term for the soil that's on the surface of the moon or on Mars. So could we use that material to create forms for tools, right? So we don't have to bring as much with us. And that works for mechanically advantaged tools. And then finally, in this bottom corner here, there's a unique property of the regolith, allows us to heat it up either with a laser or in some cases a microwave, so that you can actually melt the regolith near the very surface to form like a road or structure. So quite a number of options here. And I think where we are in the state of construction research, for extraterrestrial construction research, is we don't really know. We don't know what the real trade-offs are. These are sort of ideas that have gained fancy and people have thought about them, but it's unclear which is really the best. So I think all of these options at this point are open and available to you. So that's the construction phase. You've chosen a method for building your structure, and maybe it's a road, maybe it's a landing pad, maybe it's a habitat, but you've built something. So the next question is, all right, how are you going to operate it, and what's going to happen at the end of its life? Are you going to leave it there, or are you going to recycle it in some way? And that's where I'm going to introduce this concept of synthetic biology and biological in situ resource utilization. So this was something that NASA Ames is still studying. NASA Ames here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the concept here is, because we've discovered vast amounts of water, perhaps you could take nature with you, right? And be a partner along with your exploration journey. And so they are exploring, this team of researchers and scientists are exploring the use of engineered microorganisms to achieve mission objectives. One way to think of synthetic biology is to use a software analogy, software design analogy. So the DNA of the microorganisms or organisms would be your code. And the hardware would be your cells and the cell walls, right? They execute the code. And so with that, you can do quite a bit. And because nature has evolved many, many mechanisms for reconstituting and recapturing energy and mass or atoms, there's a lot of opportunities for end-of-life recycling. I will say, though, that this is a bit of a far-fetched idea, right? A lot of development would need to be happen would need to happen in order to prove this technology at scale. At the moment, it's a laboratory scale process, and you know, it's going to take some time and a lot of concentration and effort in order to pull it off. But I think the benefits are probably worth it, right? You start with a road for a mining operation, let's say, and that road is maybe bound together with proteins. Well, at the end of that mine's useful life, you could just chew up the road and reuse those proteins for another habitat. Maybe it is consumed and is used for producing oxygen or power or new materials. So there's a lot of opportunities here. And so I'm hoping that you get a sense of what is possible, and that in this environment, in this extreme environment, because so little useful material is there now, there's a real opportunity for recycling and reusing in ways we haven't thought of before. And ideally, that is something that can translate back to technologies here on Earth. Okay, so concept of operations done. Let's take a moment now to see what has been done in the last decade. And so this is where I'm going to focus a bit on my efforts, some of the research I did at Stanford, and some of the work that's been happening in the industry at large. So we'll talk a little bit about material science, some structural engineering, some robots, and some business models. So I had mentioned, protein-based building materials. Well, that's exactly what we studied and invented back in 2012, starting in 2012. And so what we have here is a soil, a regolith. This is a lunar simulant. We have the biopolymer, which in this case is a protein that's found in mammalian blood. It's a blood plasma protein. And if you mix those two together with water and let the water evaporate, you get a very strong, very solid building material. Plus, you can recapture some of the water that's been evaporated. And so we started out with just identifying the right protein. Once we found the protein, we had to characterize the strength of it, and then start to apply real world environmental testing. And so the latest form of it now is the brick is going to be manufactured on the International Space Station to see how a microgravity environment affects its microstructure. So diving a little bit more into it, we studied how would we manufacture it. And in the very beginning, we looked to vacuum-assisted resin infusion, the same way we make carbon fiber boats and carbon fiber parts in general. We adopted that method because on the moon, you have access to a very good vacuum source. So if we could draw through the protein solution into the material to form bricks or large bodies in a single infusion, we thought that that would be a very powerful technique that had not been proposed before. So we ran some tests with that. We made some bricks, and then fast forward about a decade, a team of students at Stanford University took the research and has now invented or created a way of manufacturing just through capillary action to draw the protein solution into molds with a dry mixture of the protein and soil. And so those will be flying. I think the announcement came out this year that they had won the award. So I think that the experiment might fly next year or the year after. But they're very excited. We're all very excited to actually have our material going to outer space. And it's the next step on the eventual journey to another surface. Then the other sort of testing we did and this was probably the highlight of my graduate experience. We did micrometeorite impact testing at the NASA Ames vertical gun range, which is as cool as it sounds. So we had to test how the material would stand up to increasing energies of impact. And you can sort of see the results live in the video, but also what happened. And so we ran from about 100 joules of energy, which is very typical for micrometeorites, to 5 kilojoules, which is a pretty significant impact and would wreck your day, so to speak. So great. We had a lot of fun in the lab, but we were able to characterize this material for the lunar environment, and that led to the development of design criteria for a landing pad. So Dr. Mia Allende, she graciously shared her slides with me, but she also applied a framework that we use for earthquake engineering and applied it to micrometeorite packs and design criteria for the moon. And that was very interesting. So she kind of expanded its use case. And so in this particular case, she studied a landing pad made out of tiles of our material, and subjected it to 10 years at the surface. So 10 years of micrometeorite bombardment. And assuming we would have to replace some of those tiles as time went on, she did not want to have more than one tile replaced over the service life, so over that 10-year period. And so she was able to simulate a landing pad and over 10 years show all of the micrometeorite impacts. And you can see in this particular simulation, 2 tiles had to be replaced over that 10-year period. So lots of meteorite impacts, but with a 3 centimeter depth, 3 centimeter thick tiles, she was able to show that on average, you wouldn't have to replace more than one. And that was very cool. That's a very cool use of structural engineering, I thought. So then moving on and in staying with the landing pad sort of thread, NASA has been funding a construction company called Icon over in Austin, and their 3D printer to study the use of a sort of lunar regolith bound by sort of a cementitious material, and they were able to show the world's first 3D printed full-scale rocket pad. And so what's really interesting about this is you have all of the different flutes to sort of dissipate the gases, because as you can imagine on the surface of the moon, when a rocket lands, it's going to kick up a lot of dirt and dust. And even around the landing pad, if you had a structure, you want to divert the gas and the hot exhaust from kicking up a lot of dust. Because what they did find on the Apollo missions is that the landers had kicked up so much dust with so much energy that the dust was able to orbit the moon and come back and hit the lander on its opposite side. So it's actually a really important problem to be solving. And it helps with landing, it helps with logistics. Having a landing pad would be fantastic. Some of that study is happening now, and we're learning quite a bit of it. And it's translating also to opportunities for building homes on Earth. So if some of you have heard of Icon, you'll know that they're building 3D printing houses in Texas. Okay, and now finally, the financing of this all. So like I said in the beginning of the presentation, what's changed in the last 10 years is that NASA has opened up to commercial opportunities, right? They're purchasing rides to the International Space Station from SpaceX and Boeing. They're helping fund small companies to develop crazy concepts like the Rocket M motor or mining operation. And so capitalizing on this, I was working with a gentleman named Bruce Cahan and a professor of law, Dr. Irmgard Marbo. And we sort of sat down and asked ourselves, could a bank finance space exploration versus government or venture capital? And so we proposed sort of a 3-layer map of the universe. And that 3-layer map is, there's a money layer, a capacities layer, and a needs layer, right? So any sort of area of space, there's going to be a need. Typically, you have a communication need, but maybe you need power or propulsion or life support, right? Many different needs. And you can meet those needs by developing the capacities. And if you match those various needs to capacities, then that might make a good mechanism for providing money and investment. All right. So if you have money there, you have capacities there, you're going to meet the needs. And that's how we sort of viewed and set up the universe. We also created one other mechanism to actually match how much money should be applied to the capacities layer. And we called that the unit of space convenience. And the idea is kind of simple. Currently, if you fly a mission today, it is self-supplied capacities. It's like you're hiking up Mount Everest for the very first time, every single time. There are no base camps. There are no refueling stations. You have whatever's on your back or in your pack is what you got. And that's not really a sustainable version of exploration. We all know that now you can climb Mount Everest. There are 3 base camps. There are Sherpas. And more people can do it. And that's because there are steps along the way. So we wanted to get to that point, right? We wanted to have people rely on capacities from other space missions and business models so you could save or extend your budget. And in order to do that, we created this concept of a unit of space convenience, right? A functional valuation for space economies. And what this can do is lower the risk via redundancy. You don't need everyone to be launching their own satellite. You can purchase services from others. You can have the confidence of proven flight hardware, because remember, the first time you launch it, probably the first time it's ever been launched. And then you can also support the financing of space assets that way, because you can leverage the monies over time. And so loans can become possible or plausible in this scenario. So the higher the unit of space convenience, then the more likely or the better investment it would be. And so we published a paper on that and gave a presentation. So let me pause there, because this sort of wraps up the sort of doing portion. So in the last 10 years, we've went from material science to structural engineering to robotics to business models, right? This idea, supporting the concept of operations for anything in space requires you kind of take a weird and wonky path. That's kind of what I really enjoy about working on this and working towards that. And it also, leads me to working with people that I probably wouldn't have otherwise worked with while I was in school or even in industry today, right? Working with aerospace engineers, mechanical engineers, biologists, computer programmers, finance experts, law experts, economists. It kind of took you all over the place, but it's such an interesting concept and idea to figure out how do we actually build in space, that it keeps you going. And so this is just a small tidbit of what was done in the last decade, and this is what I'm aware of, right? And what I'm prepared to show you. But obviously, there's plenty more work out there that's happened. That if you dig in a little bit, you'll uncover it right at the surface. Okay, so then the last portion of this talk, What have we learned, and why do we do this? And so the common question has always been, why not focus on Earth? We have enough problems, enough needs. Why not just keep all of our efforts and our investment solving problems on Earth? And I sort of broke this up into 4 responses, and these are sort of very common. If I was Elon Musk, or if I'm putting on my Musk hat, he would say we have all of our eggs in one basket, right? We should be multiplanetary in case of a catastrophic event, in case of something terrible happening on Earth. It could be a meteorite strike. It could be climate change. We should have a colony on Earth so that we could come back, or excuse me, a colony on Mars so we could come back to Earth and repopulate if we needed to. If I put on my Jeff Bezos hat, the thinking there is we should protect our home, right? We should move industry and heavy industry and much of our commercial activity off planet into space, and we should focus on Earth, just agriculture and light commercial and residential. If I put on my Carl Sagan hat, I would say, are we alone? If we stay here on Earth, would we ever answer that question to the fullest extent? And I think that's one of the most profound questions we could ever ask, and would completely change our view and perception, right? So I think going and answering that question requires us to go out and explore. And then finally, there's always been advancement through exploration, right? The grand challenge of building in space requires us to innovate. And so that for me is really the drive. And so if we can, even just by thinking about and having these fun sort of thought studies and presentations like this, could we advance? Could we take an idea and bring it to Earth and advance our existence today through it? And I think we can. So what are the benefits to Earth? I broke it up into 3 parts. Number one, I think most important to me is getting the next generation contributing to innovation in the design and construction industry. This is the team of students at Stanford that invented or created that mechanism that's going to fly on the International Space Station to study the bricks. And you can see they're a diverse group of students, diverse backgrounds, diverse studies, and they're all just passionate about the topic. And I think that's important in attracting new talent to our industry, right? These students are very bright, and they want to contribute. And so maybe they'll take careers in the design and construction industry because they want to advance this and move it forward. Maybe they'll create the next big startup. Maybe they'll create the very first construction company that builds on another planet. And in doing so, contributes to the economy here on Earth. So that to me is really important, is inspiring the next generation and bringing great minds to our industry through very difficult challenges. Next to that is just the field of robotics and robots that can be operating in the field, from 3D printers to teleoperated machines. A lot of these companies that we're seeing are taking advantage of the enormous amount of investment that has been going into our industry in the last couple of years. And some of those companies have visions to take their tech beyond Earth, while others are just beneficiaries of investment from space agencies, from NASA or ESA. But either way, they are paving the path to enable construction to happen anywhere. And as for me, this is the next focus. This is where I think the next step in my career ought to be, given the position and the opportunity. We need more robots, right? We want to put robots in harm's way. We want to stop putting people in harm's way. Safety is an important, very important issue in our industry, and it's just compounded by the fact if you go into space, right? So let's develop those robots. Let's develop that economy here on Earth so that we can then bring it with us. And it's not such a radical idea to be printing or building with robots on the moon or on Mars. So I'm very fascinated about that. Starting to develop a robotics group at DPR. And again, I hope that that attracts new people to the workforce. And I hope this group is sort of the connective tissue between project sites and vendors. And then finally, if we start to look for and develop technologies for extreme environments like the moon or Mars, it'll help us with addressing extreme environments here on Earth. We're building more and more into the north and the south poles. We are starting to build underwater, and a lot of it's for research, but some of it is also for practical commercial applications. You can see in the top right-hand corner here, the top right-hand corner here, that Microsoft has developed an underwater data center, right? I think that sort of tech is benefiting from space construction and investments in space, as well as just the need for data here on Earth. So I think there's an opportunity to better address extreme environments where we can live and work in them. And the more we do that, the less extreme they become. And I think the more we pursue that here on Earth, the more likely we're able to pursue that in outer space. So let's bring this all together. We've been on quite an adventure. And thank you for coming along. So we talked about the plan, do, learn framework. Know your environment, develop a concept of operations, start picking apart the riskiest pieces and studying them, and learn from them and apply that knowledge here on Earth. Next, I do believe that grand challenges breed paths of innovation. There's just so many opportunities when you really challenge yourself and put yourself in extreme situations. You will have to innovate, and that is a mechanism for breeding innovation. You have to be willing to do what it takes to make progress, and that's going to take you on various paths. It's going to take you on a finance and law path. I didn't know much about the UN Outer Space Treaty until I met Professor Irmgard Marbo, and I'm glad I did. And so that was really fun. The other thing is that exploration is inherently a multidisciplinary endeavor, and our industry is not afraid of that. We are inherently focused on our disciplines, whether it's AE or C and FM, but space really expands that to a whole new level and a whole nother level of detail. And I really enjoy that. And finally, this is just a slice of what many others are working on. I can't stress that enough. There are a lot of folks around the world who are excited by this idea, who are secretly working in their garages or not so secretly working for space agencies. There are opportunities if you want to work or contribute towards extraterrestrial construction. Just have to look for them. And so with that, I will wrap up and say thank you. Feel free to reach out and talk with me.
Henning, this was extraordinary. Thank you so much. I want to invite everyone in the audience to ask questions. You can throw them in the chat box. But I immediately have a question for you, which is, how much collaboration is currently taking place amongst all the different efforts going on around the world? So you've got government involvement and private investment. How much are those entities actually collaborating and sharing their innovations and the ideas that they put out there?
I mean, it's a tough question to answer. You know, I know it is happening. You know, NASA has really opened up their doors. ESA has always been very friendly. They're running hackathons and design competitions for construction robotics. NASA had their construction challenge where we saw a couple of Martian habitats 3D printed. And yeah, there's a few investors too that are very interested and they have their portfolios. But to give you a short answer, it is happening, but I can't really say to what scale.
I wanted to also ask you about this great line that you had, that grand challenges breed paths of innovation. Yeah, CIDCI is an organization all about innovation. And I guess what I would wonder is if you could talk just a little bit more about that inspiring of innovation for the day-to-day work of everyone on this call, is just, you know, getting their hands dirty doing, you know, building the important buildings which frame our lives. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of stems from the sort of necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And this is just taking that to a point where identify a challenge, identify whether it's in your day-to-day work, something that's frustrating you, that is an opportunity. That is an opportunity to innovate, to solve the challenge, and not put up with it anymore, right? And so what I like about a grand challenge, something as audacious as building on a different planet, is yeah, it just forces you to think outside the box, and there are just some wild and crazy ideas, and I really enjoy that. Enjoy that challenge. But it's all about problem solving and finding out what your needs are. So put that into context with your day-to-day job as well.
Very inspirational. We all need that on Friday morning, right? We have Pascal Ray, who is joining us. He's actually going to be doing a webinar for us soon. Pascal, I'm going to unmute you and let you ask your question directly to Henning, okay? Go ahead, Pascal.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
First of all, what a fantastic presentation. I am so excited about this. I wanted to ask how much work has been done on the risk register for this type of operation. I think something like that would be super valuable for the risk management industry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, NASA does a tremendous amount of work in looking at risk, and it's part of their sort of project management portfolio. I know that they've been doing quite a bit of work on it. There's probably a few folks that you could reach out to. The one person I'm thinking about, there's one person in NASA in general who I think really leads the construction efforts. His name is, oh no.
David Kaplan?
Not David Kaplan, I'm sorry. He's in Florida, Mueller. His last name is Mueller. I'll have to post it in chat. I apologize. I haven't had my coffee yet. But yeah, he's been doing a lot of work on this and has been looking into risks and new technologies. And he's at the Kennedy Space Center. Rob Mueller.
Rob Mueller, okay.
Great. Well, I think we're unfortunately at the end of our time together. Henning, this was so fantastic. I just think I'm going to have the most amazing random thoughts all day today. I can't wait to talk to my family about this over dinner tonight. Hey, first, I also want to say to you, good luck with the imminent arrival of Junior Henning. We're excited for you. I hope that all goes well for you and your wife. Okay. Thank you again. This was just a terrific presentation. So for those of you in the audience, this concludes CIDCI's online salon. The session will be recorded and placed on the CIDCI website as soon as possible. To join us for future webinars, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Our next salon is on Friday, July 30th with Pete Court. He's going to be discussing DFMA, or Design for Manufacture and Assembly. Special thanks to Monica Zwisler and Katie Olson for keeping us on track today, and our sponsors who made all of this possible. Thanks for joining us. If you have thoughts or comments, please reach us via the website. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful weekend.